Give yous all company assets now, HR snapped after firing me. I smiled and handed them the property deed. An hour later, the CO called in panic. Why is there an eviction notice at my door with a repossession order? We'll need your badge, your keys, and any company-owned assets in your possession. Immediately. Vanessa Sinclair, the VP of HR who'd been here all of 8 months, said it like she was ordering lunch. Efficient. Like firing me after 19 years was just another item on her to-do list. Before we continue, I want to thank you for being here. If you believe hard work and loyalty deserve more than a misspelled severance letter, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach others who need to hear this. Now let's see what happens next. I reached into my bag and pulled out my access badge. Set it on the conference table. Then my keyring, 17 keys, each one labeled in my handwriting. Server room. Roof access. Electrical panel. I laid them out slowly one by one. Vanessa's glossy smile widened. She thought she'd won. Then I pulled out the manila envelope. Thick. Heavy. Sealed with red wax. I slid it across the table. You want all company assets? I said. Here's the deed to the building. The color drained from her face. What are you talking about? She whispered. I leaned back in my chair. You're sitting in it right now. And your lease expired 2 weeks ago. The lawyer next to her grabbed the envelope, ripped it open, and his hands started shaking. My name is Elena Frost. And I'm about to teach this company what happens when you forget who actually owns the ground you're standing on. But let me back up. Because this story doesn't start in conference room C with Vanessa's fake sympathy and a misspelled severance letter. It starts at 6:30 this morning, 3.5 hours before they decided to throw me away like yesterday's coffee grounds. I arrived at Titan Dynamics the same way I had for 19 years. Early, alone, and carrying a toolbox that was older than most of the employees here. My thermos of black coffee sat in the cup holder of my truck, still steaming. The parking lot was empty except for the CEO's Tesla, which was always here. Greg Callahan liked people to think he worked harder than everyone else. Maybe he did. Or maybe he just slept in his office to avoid going home to his third wife. I unlocked the side entrance with the brass key I'd had since 2004. The building was quiet. Peaceful even. I liked it this way. Before the noise. Before the egos. Before people started filling the space with their complaints and their lattes and their endless meetings about meetings. I went straight to the basement. There was a leak near the old boiler. I'd noticed it on Friday, a slow drip that pooled near the southeast corner. Small now, but it wouldn't stay that way. Leaks never did. Ignore them long enough and they'd take down a whole ceiling. I'd seen it happen in other buildings. It wouldn't happen here. Not on my watch. I set my toolbox down, crouched beside the pipe, and got to work. The wrench was cold in my hand. The basement smelled like damp concrete and rust. My knees ached, they always did these days, but I didn't mind. This was honest work. Work that mattered. Work that kept this place standing. At 6:47 a.m. I heard footsteps above me. Someone had arrived early. Probably one of the sales guys trying to impress Greg. I tightened the valve, wiped my hands on my jeans, and stood up. My phone buzzed in my back pocket. A calendar invite. Quick sync, conference room C, 10 a.m. Sent by Vanessa Sinclair. No subject line. No explanation. Just those 5 words. My stomach tightened. I stared at the screen for a long moment, reading it over and over like the words might change if I looked hard enough. Quick sync. I'd been in this business long enough to know what that meant. Quick sync was corporate speak for your time here is over. I'd seen it before. How I'd been there for it. I'd held Harold's hand in the parking lot 2 years ago when they let him go. Harold, the senior accountant who'd been here since the beginning. He'd cried. Told me he didn't know how he'd tell his wife. Told me he thought he was safe. No one is ever safe. But I told myself I was different. I wasn't just another employee. I wasn't just a line item on a budget. I was Elena Frost, Director of Corporate Infrastructure and Asset Management. I was the woman who kept the lights on, the servers running, the toilets flushing. I was the one who showed up at 6:30 a.m. every single day with a toolbox and a plan. I was the one who saved this company. In 2004, Titan Dynamics was 6 people crammed into a converted warehouse with exposed brick, leaking pipes, and a ceiling that dripped every time it rained. Greg Callahan was a kid with a dream and no money. No credit. No collateral. No landlord would touch him. He came to me, his only employee with a steady paycheck and a credit score above 600, and begged me to help. So I didn't co-sign a lease. I bought the building. Outright. With the life insurance payout from my late husband, David. $50,000. Everything we'd saved. Everything he'd left me. I used it to secure the property, then leased it back to Titan at cost. No profit. No markup. Just enough to cover property taxes and maintenance. Greg said it was temporary. Just until we get on our feet, he'd said. That was 19 years ago. And in all that time, no one ever asked me to transfer the deed. No one ever checked who actually owned the building. They just assumed. Assumed it was the company's. Assumed it was Greg's. Assumed I was just the woman who fixed the boiler and replaced the light bulbs. They forgot. But I didn't. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, grabbed my toolbox and headed upstairs. The second floor was starting to wake up. I heard the hum of computers booting up, the hiss of the espresso machine in the break room, the low murmur of voices. I stopped by the break room to grab a paper towel. Someone had spilled coffee on the counter again, and that's when I heard them. 2 junior developers. Mid-20s probably. Fresh out of college with their hoodies and their energy drinks and their complete lack of respect for anything that came before them. Did you hear they're restructuring? One of them said. Yeah, the other replied, laughing. Getting rid of dead weight. I froze. Dead weight. That's what they thought of people like me. People who'd been here long enough to remember when this place was nothing. When we ate ramen for dinner and worked 80-hour weeks because we believed in something bigger than ourselves. I didn't say anything. I just wiped up the coffee, tossed the paper towel in the trash and walked out. My office was at the end of the hall. Small. Cramped. Tucked between the supply closet and the server room. A desk, a filing cabinet, a chair that squeaked when I leaned back. But it was mine. On the desk was a framed photo. David and me standing in front of the warehouse in 2004. His arm was around my shoulders. We were both smiling. Behind us, you could see the hand-painted sign someone had made. Titan Dynamics. David used to joke that I loved this building more than I loved him. Maybe he was right. He died 6 years ago. Heart attack. Sudden. One day he was here making jokes about my toolbox and kissing me goodbye in the driveway. The next day he was gone. I threw myself into work after that. It was easier than going home to an empty house. Easier than sitting in the silence and remembering all the plans we'd made that would never happen now. This place became everything. And now they were about to take it away. I ran my finger over David's face in the photo. He'd believed in Greg. He'd believed in Titan. He'd believed in the dream. So had I. At 9:50 a.m. I stood up, smoothed down my cardigan, the navy one with the coffee stain near the hem that I'd never managed to get out, and walked toward conference room C. The hallway felt longer than usual. I passed the wall of company milestones. Photos in sleek black frames. Ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Award presentations. Team retreats in the mountains. Greg shaking hands with investors. Vanessa Sinclair smiling in her designer blazer at some corporate gala. I wasn't in any of them. I was always behind the camera. Making sure the lights worked. Making sure the projector didn't die halfway through the keynote. Making sure someone remembered to order lunch. Invisible. I reached the door to conference room C and paused. Through the frosted glass I could see 2 silhouettes. Vanessa. And someone else. A man in a suit. My chest tightened. I took a breath. Smoothed my cardigan one more time. And pushed the door open. The room smelled like stale air and bad decisions. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Vanessa sat on one side of the long table, perfectly composed, her nails glossy and folded in front of her. Next to her was the man in the suit. Mid-40s, slicked back hair, expensive watch, dead eyes. A lawyer. Elena, Vanessa said, her voice warm and fake. Thanks for coming in. Please have a seat. I didn't move. She gestured to the chair. Really? Sit. I stayed standing. Her smile twitched. Elena, we wanted to have a conversation with you about some strategic adjustments we're making. Strategic adjustments. Corporate speak for you're done here. You're firing me, I said. She hesitated. Just for a second. Then she pushed a folder across the table. We prefer to call it a mutual separation. We're offering 3-month severance, benefits through October and a non-disclosure agreement. We think it's fair. I pulled the folder toward me and opened it. The first page was a severance agreement. Standard. Pulled. The second page was a letter. Dear Miss Frost. I stopped reading. Frost. 19 years. And they couldn't even spell my name right. I closed the folder. That's when the lawyer spoke. We'll need your badge, your keys, and any company-owned assets in your possession. Immediately. And that's when I knew. They had no idea what they'd just done. I reached into my bag. Fully. Deliberately. And I handed them everything they asked for. Including the one thing they never knew I had. The lawyer stared at the deed like it might bite him. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages. County seal. Notary stamp. My signature at the bottom, dated and recorded. All of it official. All of it legal. All of it mine. Vanessa leaned over his shoulder, her glossy nails tapping against the table. This can't be right, she muttered. There has to be some mistake. There's no mistake, I said. The lawyer looked up at me, his face pale. You're saying you own this property? I'm saying exactly that. He cleared his throat, straightened his tie, tried to regain composure. Miss Frost, even if this document is legitimate, you can't simply evict a sitting tenant without proper notice and legal process. I leaned forward. Oh, I gave notice, I said. 3 times actually. June 10th. June 25th. July 10th. All sent via email to Greg Callahan, to your finance department, and to facilities. Subject line. Lease renewal required. Action needed by July 15th. I have read receipts for all 3. Vanessa's face went from pale to flushed. That's impossible. We would have. Would have what? I interrupted. Would have responded. Would have taken it seriously. You didn't. You ignored them. And now your lease is expired. As of August 15th, you've been operating without a valid agreement. The lawyer flipped through the deed again, scanning the fine print. I could see the moment it clicked. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. Section 9B, he said quietly. That's right, I replied. Renewal of lease term requires written notice from the lessee no later than 30 days prior to expiration. You missed it. Which means I have the legal right to terminate tenancy and reclaim my property. Vanessa's hands were shaking now. She pulled out her phone, scrolling frantically. I never saw any emails about a lease renewal. That's because you weren't on the original distribution list, I said. You've only been here 8 months. Greg was. Finance was. Facilities was. They all saw it. They just didn't care. She looked at the lawyer. He looked at the deed. Neither of them looked at me. I stood up. There's one more thing, I said. They both looked up. Suite 328. The back office. You've been subletting it to a cryptocurrency consultant named Blake Hartman for the past 18 months. Did Greg mention that to you? The lawyer's face went white. Section 8C of the lease agreement explicitly states that any subletting requires written landlord approval, I continued. Greg never asked. I never approved. That's a material breach of contract. Which means even if you had renewed on time, I'd still have grounds to terminate. Vanessa opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. This is insane. No, I said. This is business. You wanted to make strategic adjustments. Congratulations. You just made the biggest one of your career. I turned and walked toward the door. Wait, Vanessa said, her voice sharp. You can't just leave. We need to. You don't need anything from me anymore, I said without turning around. You made that very clear. I returned all company assets just like you asked. Including the one you forgot you didn't own. I pushed the door open and stepped into the hallway. Behind me I heard Vanessa's voice rising in pitch. This isn't over, Elena. We have lawyers. We have resources. We'll fight this. I stopped. Turned around. Looked her dead in the eye. Go ahead, I said. But while you're fighting you might want to start packing. You've got 30 days. I walked away. The hallway was too bright. Too loud. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hands were shaking. I shoved them into my pockets and kept walking. Past the break room. Past the wall of company milestones. Past the row of glass-walled offices where people were typing away, oblivious to the fact that their entire world was about to collapse. I made it to the elevator before my knees started to buckle. I pressed the button. Waited. The elevator dinged. The doors slid open. I stepped inside and hit the button for the parking garage. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirrored wall. Navy cardigan. Coffee stain. Gray hair pulled back in a ponytail. The same woman who'd walked in here at 6:30 this morning. But I didn't feel the same. I felt lighter. And terrified. The elevator descended slowly. Each floor felt like an eternity. I counted them in my head. 4, 3, 2, 1. Basement. The doors opened. I stepped out into the cold, fluorescent-lit parking garage. My truck was parked in the far corner where it always was. I walked toward it, my footsteps echoing off the concrete. I unlocked the door. Slid into the driver's seat. Closed the door. And then I just sat there. Hands on the steering wheel. Engine off. Staring at the concrete pillar in front of me. What did I just do? The question hit me like a wave. I'd just evicted an entire company. 230 employees. People with families. People with mortgages. People who had nothing to do with the decision to fire me. My chest tightened. I pulled out my phone. My hands were still shaking. I had 3 missed calls. 2 from unknown numbers. 1 from Greg Callahan. I didn't listen to the voicemails. Instead, I opened my email and scrolled to the folder labeled Lease, Titan Dynamics. There they were. All 3 notices I'd sent. June 10th, June 25th, July 10th. All marked as read. All ignored. I took a screenshot of each one and saved them to a separate folder labeled Evidence. Then I called Marcus Delgado. He picked up on the second ring. Elena. You okay? I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I just handed them the deed. Silence. Then a low whistle. You actually did it. I did it. How'd they react? Vanessa looked like she was going to pass out. The lawyer looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Greg hasn't called me yet, but I'm sure he will. Marcus laughed. Oh, he will. Trust me. This is going to hit him like a freight train. Did you mention the subletting violation? I did. Good. That seals it. Even if they try to fight the eviction, we've got them on breach of contract. They're done, Elena. You won. I stared at the concrete pillar. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like free falling. Marcus, what if I just made the biggest mistake of my life? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You didn't. How do you know? Because you're not the one who made the mistake. They did. 19 years ago when they forgot to ask who owned the building. 2 months ago when they ignored your lease renewal notices. This morning when they fired you and demanded you hand over company assets. They made the mistake, Elena. You're just making them pay for it. I closed my eyes. I filed the eviction notice this morning, Marcus continued. It'll be delivered within the hour. They'll get the email and the physical copy. After that, they've got 30 days to vacate. If they try to fight it, we go to court. But trust me, no judge is going to side with them. Not with the paper trail we've got. Okay, I said quietly. You did the right thing. Yeah. I mean it, Elena. You did. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat there in the silence, listening to my heartbeat slow down. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You just made a huge mistake. I stared at it. Then I blocked the number. Another buzz. Different number. Greg wants to talk. Tomorrow. His office. I didn't reply. I started the engine, put the truck in reverse and pulled out of the parking spot. As I drove up the ramp toward the exit, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The building stood behind me, tall and solid. The building I'd saved. The building I'd loved. The building that had been my second home for 19 years. It wasn't mine anymore. Not emotionally. But legally, it always had been. I turned onto the street and drove away. And for the first time in years, I didn't look back. I pulled into my driveway just after noon. The house looked exactly the same as it had when I left this morning. Small, quiet, ordinary. A ranch-style home in Littleton with beige siding and a front porch that needed repainting. David and I bought it in 1998. 26 years ago. Back when we thought we had all the time in the world. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the front door. My hands were still shaking. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to steady them. Trying to steady myself. What did I just do? The question had been circling in my head since I left the parking garage. It followed me through every red light, every turn, every mile between downtown Denver and home. I'd just evicted an entire company. 230 employees. People with families. Mortgages. Kids in college. People who had nothing to do with the decision to fire me. My chest tightened. I grabbed my bag, got out of the truck and walked to the front door. My keys jingled in my hand. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was too quiet. It always was. I set my bag down on the kitchen table and looked around. Same furniture. Same curtains. Same framed photos on the mantel. David and me on our wedding day. David and me at the Grand Canyon. David and me standing in front of the warehouse in 2004, arms around each other, smiling like we'd just won the lottery. I walked over to the mantel and picked up the photo. He looked so young. We both did. I ran my thumb over his face the way I always did when I needed to feel close to him. I don't know if I did the right thing, I whispered. He didn't answer. He never did. I set the photo back down and walked to the kitchen. Poured myself a glass of water. My phone sat on the counter, screen dark. I'd silenced it on the drive home. I didn't want to see the messages. Didn't want to hear the calls. But I picked it up anyway. 3 missed calls. All from unknown numbers. 2 texts. I opened the first one. You just made a huge mistake. My stomach dropped. I stared at the message. No name. No context. Just those 6 words. I blocked the number. Then I opened the second text. Different number. Greg wants to talk. Tomorrow. Him. His office. I set the phone down and walked away. My hands were shaking again. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the stack of paperwork I'd left there this morning. Lease agreements. Email records. County filings. Everything I'd prepared over the past 2 weeks. I'd been planning this. Not consciously. Not deliberately. But somewhere in the back of my mind I knew this day was coming. Ever since Vanessa Sinclair walked through the doors of Titan Dynamics 8 months ago with her designer blazer and her corporate jargon, I knew. She'd made comments. Little ones. Casual ones. We need to modernize our operations. We need to eliminate redundancies. We need to bring in fresh perspectives. I knew what that meant. I was the redundancy. I was the one who needed to be eliminated. So I'd started pulling files. Printing records. Organizing documents. Just in case. And today I'd used them. My phone buzzed. I flinched. I picked it up. A text from Marcus. Filed and stamped. Eviction notice is live. You're a savage, Elena. I stared at the message. Savage. Was that what I was? I set the phone down and walked to the bedroom. The house felt too big. Too empty. The silence pressed in on me from all sides. I opened the closet and pulled out an old shoebox from the top shelf. It was dusty. I hadn't touched it in years. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. Inside were letters. Handwritten notes from Greg. From the early days. Back when Titan Dynamics was 6 people and a dream. I pulled out the first one. Elena, you saved us. I'll never forget this. Greg. I read it slowly. Then I pulled out the next one. We couldn't have done this without you. You're the heart of this company. G. And the next. Your family, Elena. Always. Greg. Family. I read that word over and over. Family doesn't get fired via HR intermediary. Family doesn't get handed a misspelled severance letter. Family doesn't get escorted out like a security risk. I stuffed the letters back into the box and shoved it under the bed. I didn't want to see them anymore. I didn't want to remember the version of Greg who wrote those words. The version who sat on the floor with us eating pizza at midnight, dreaming about what we could build together. That version was gone. Or maybe he'd never really existed. I walked back to the kitchen. My phone was ringing. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Same number. I answered. Elena Frost speaking. Silence. Then breathing. Heavy. Deliberate. Hello. I said. Nothing. Then a click. They hung up. My hands started shaking again. I set the phone down and stepped back, staring at it like it might explode. Who was that? Another call came through. Different number. I didn't answer. Then a text. This isn't over. I blocked the number. Another text. Another number. You're going to regret this. Block. Another. 230 people are going to lose their jobs because of you. I turned off my phone. My chest felt tight. My breathing was shallow. I sat down at the kitchen table and put my head in my hands. What if they were right? What if I just destroyed 230 lives because I was angry? Because I was hurt? Because I wanted revenge? I thought about Harold, the accountant they'd fired 2 years ago. I thought about how he cried in the parking lot. How he told me he didn't know how he'd tell his wife. What if there were 230 Harolds now? What if this wasn't justice? What if this was just cruelty? I sat there for a long time staring at the table trying to breathe. Then I stood up, walked to the bedroom, pulled the shoebox out from under the bed, and I threw it in the trash. I didn't need Greg's empty words anymore. I didn't need his promises. I didn't need his version of family. I needed to remember who I was before Titan Dynamics. Before the 19 years of invisible work. Before I became the woman who fixed everything and expected nothing in return. I needed to remember that I mattered. Even if no one else thought so. I walked back to the kitchen, turned on my phone and opened my email. There they were. The 3 lease renewal notices I'd sent. June 10th, June 25th, July 10th. All marked as read. All ignored. I took screenshots. Saved them to a folder labeled Evidence. Then I opened a new email. To Greg Callahan. Subject, Final Notice. Body, your lease expired on August 15th. You have 30 days to vacate the property. All further communication should be directed to my attorney, Marcus Delgado. I attached Marcus's contact information. And I hit send. Then I poured myself a glass of wine, walked to the back porch and sat down. The sun was starting to set. The sky was streaked with pink and orange. The air smelled like pine in late summer. I took a sip of wine. My hands had stopped shaking. For the first time all day I felt like I could breathe. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But tonight I was still standing. And that was enough. I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. At first I thought I was dreaming. But the buzzing didn't stop. It kept going, relentless, like a swarm of bees trapped in a jar. I reached over and grabbed the phone, squinting at the screen in the dark. 5:30 a.m. 12 text messages. 7 missed calls. 3 voicemails. All from numbers I didn't recognize. A few from Greg. 1 from Vanessa. I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. I turned it back on last night. Sometime after the wine. Sometime after I threw Greg's letters in the trash. I couldn't remember exactly when. I just remembered needing to know. Needing to see what would happen next. Now I knew. Panic. I sat up, swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood. My body ached. My head felt heavy. But my hands were steadier than they'd been yesterday. I walked to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face and looked at myself in the mirror. Same face. Same gray hair. Same tired eyes. But something was different. I felt resolved. I got dressed, jeans, a plain gray sweater, my old sneakers, and walked to the kitchen. Made coffee. The smell filled the house, warm and familiar. I sat at the table and picked up my phone. I didn't listen to the voicemails. Didn't read the texts. I just scrolled through the list of missed calls, watching the timestamps roll by. 8:47 p.m., 9:15 p.m., 10:03 p.m., 11:34 p.m., 2:18 a.m. They'd been calling all night. Good. I took a sip of coffee and called Marcus. He picked up on the first ring. Elena. You okay? They're panicking, I said. He laughed. A deep, rumbling sound. Yeah, I'd say so. Greg's lawyer called me last night. Around 10:30. Threatened to sue. Claimed you were acting in bad faith. Claimed the eviction was retaliatory. And I told him to read the lease agreement and call me back when he found a legal leg to stand on. Did he call back? Nope. I smiled. Elena, they don't have a case, Marcus continued. The lease expired. They missed the renewal deadline. You gave notice. Everything's documented. They're scrambling because they know they screwed up. I stared into my coffee. What if they find something? Some loophole. They won't. Trust me. I've been doing this for 30 years. This is as airtight as it gets. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Meet me at the diner, Marcus said. I've got the delivery confirmation. You'll want to see it. The diner was a small place on the edge of downtown. Worn booths, checkered floors, and a waitress named Betty who'd been working there since the 80s. Marcus and I had been meeting here for years. It was neutral ground. Quiet. Safe. He was already sitting in a corner booth when I arrived. a manila folder in front of him and a cup of coffee in his hand. I slid into the seat across from him. "Morning," he said, sliding the folder toward me. "Eviction notice was delivered yesterday at 9:04 a.m. signed for by the receptionist. Greg got his personal copy at 9:47 a.m. I opened the folder. Inside was a photocopy of the signed delivery receipt. The receptionist's signature was barely legible, but it was there. Visual. According to my contact at the county, Marcus continued, Greg tried to file an emergency injunction at 10:15 a.m. I looked up. An injunction? Yep. He wanted a judge to halt the eviction process. Claimed he needed time to review the documents. Claimed you didn't provide adequate notice. My chest tightened. And? Marcus grinned. Denied. Judge took one look at the lease terms, the missed renewal deadline, and your email records and said there's no grounds for an injunction. They had 30 days notice. They ignored it. Case closed. Relief washed over me like a wave. But there's more, Marcus said, leaning forward. The subletting violation. Blake Hartman. Exactly. Suite 328. Greg's been renting it out to this crypto consultant for the past 18 months. No written approval from you. No documentation. Nothing. I'd found out about Blake 2 months ago, purely by accident. I was updating the building insurance, something I did every year, and saw his name listed as an occupant. I didn't recognize it, so I asked around. Quietly. Carefully. Turned out Greg had made a side deal. Extra income. Under the table. I never said anything. I just filed it away. Section 8C of the lease agreement explicitly states that any subletting requires written landlord approval, Marcus said. Greg never asked. You never approved. That's a material breach of contract. What does that mean? It means even if they'd renewed the lease on time, you'd still have grounds to terminate. And if they want to fight the eviction, we can countersue for breach and charge them back rent at market rate for the subletting. That's an additional $47,000 over the past 18 months. I stared at him. 47,000? Yep. I sat back in the booth trying to process it. I don't want their money, Marcus. I just want them out. He nodded. Then you'll get exactly that. But it's good to have leverage. Just in case. Betty came by and refilled our coffee. I thanked her and took a sip, letting the warmth settle in my chest. What happens now? I asked. Now, we wait. They've got 30 days to vacate. If they leave quietly, that's the end of it. If they try to fight, we go to court. But trust me, Elena, they're not going to fight. They know they don't have a case. I nodded slowly. Marcus reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You did the right thing, he said. I wanted to believe him. I left the diner just after 8 a.m. The sun was bright, the air crisp. I walked to my truck, unlocked the door, and slid into the driver's seat. That's when my phone rang. Greg Callahan. I stared at the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore it. To let it go to voicemail. To pretend he didn't exist. But another part, the part that had spent 19 years answering his calls at all hours, fixing his problems, saving his company, couldn't help but answer. I picked up. Elena Frost speaking. His voice was tight. Strained. Barely controlled. We need to talk. I didn't say anything. This is insane, Elena, he continued. You can't just evict us. We have 230 employees. Contracts. Clients. You're going to destroy everything we built. I stopped breathing. Everything we built. Those words. I got out of the truck and stood in the middle of the parking lot, phone pressed to my ear. Everything we built? I repeated slowly. Yes. This company. This building. Everything. I closed my eyes. Greg, I said quietly. I bought the building. With my late husband's life insurance money. I wired the electrical system. I negotiated the lease. I kept that place running while you played CEO. And you fired me. So no, I'm not destroying anything. You already did that. Silence. Then his voice, softer now. Desperate. Elena, please. We can fix this. We can work something out. No, I said. We can't. Elena. I hung up. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I stood there in the parking lot, phone in my hand, staring at the sky. The sun was bright. The air was cool. And for the first time in 19 years, I felt like I wasn't carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. I got back in the truck, started the engine, and drove home. And I didn't look back. When I got home, I locked the door behind me and stood in the entryway for a long moment, just breathing. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I walked to the kitchen, set my keys on the counter, and poured myself a glass of water. My phone sat next to the sink, screen dark. I'd silenced it after hanging up on Greg. I didn't want to hear it ring. Didn't want to see his name flash across the screen again. For 2 days I didn't leave the house. I organized my paperwork, filed receipts, watered my plants, cleaned the kitchen until the counters gleamed. I did anything I could to keep my hands busy and my mind quiet. But on the 3rd day everything changed. I was sitting on the couch folding laundry when I heard a knock at the door. I froze. No one ever came to my door. Not anymore. Not since David died. I set down the laundry and walked to the window, peeking through the curtain. It was Carol, my neighbor from 2 houses down. She was holding her iPad and waving at me through the glass. I opened the door. "Elena," she said, slightly out of breath. "You need to see this." She pushed past me into the living room and sat on the couch, tapping frantically at her iPad. "Carol, what's going on?" She turned the screen toward me. It was a news article. Local outlet. The headline read, "Tech firm faces eviction after firing longtime employee who owned the building." My stomach dropped. There was a photo. The eviction notice. Fluorescent orange. Zip tied to the front door of Suite 300. I stared at it. "Scroll down," Carol said, her eyes wide. "Look at the comments." I took the iPad from her hands and scrolled. "Imagine firing the person who owns your building. What idiots. CO is a complete moron. She's a legend. I hope she takes them for everything. This is the most beautiful revenge I've ever seen." There were hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. I handed the iPad back to Carol. "Is this you?" she asked, her voice soft. I nodded. She set the iPad down and hugged me. Tight. Like she was afraid I might disappear. "Good for you, honey," she said. "Those corporate jerks deserve it." I smiled. But inside I felt something twist. Pride. And unease. This was bigger than I thought. That afternoon my phone started ringing again. I turned it back on to check my email, and within minutes the calls started flooding in. The first one was from a reporter. "Jessica Lai. Denver Post. Miss Frost, I'd love to get your side of the story. This is a huge public interest piece. People are calling you a hero." I gripped the phone tighter. "I'm not interested in publicity," I said. "This is a private legal matter." "I understand," she said, her voice warm and persuasive. "But the public is very interested. Social media is exploding. Don't you want to set the record straight? Tell people what really happened." A hero. I'd never been called that before. But I didn't want to be a hero. I just wanted to be left alone. "No comment," I said and hung up. But the calls kept coming. Local news stations. A podcast called Justice Served. Even a TikTok creator who wanted to do a reaction video. I turned off my phone. I sat on the couch, staring at the wall, trying to process what was happening. This wasn't just about me and Titan anymore. It was public. I walked to the mantel and picked up the photo of David. The one from 2004. The two of us standing in front of the warehouse, arms around each other, smiling like we'd just conquered the world. "Did I do the right thing?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He never did. I set the photo down and walked to the kitchen. Poured myself a glass of wine. It was only 3 p.m., but I didn't care. I sat at the table and stared out the window. What if this all backfired? What if Greg found a way to twist the narrative? What if people started blaming me instead of him? What if I became the villain? I took a sip of wine and closed my eyes. On the 4th day I heard another knock at the door. This time I looked through the peephole before opening it. It was Dan Mercer. The facilities manager from Titan. Mid-30s. Quiet. Always respectful. One of the few people who ever said thank you when I fixed something. I opened the door. "Hey Elena," he said, hands shoved in his pockets. "I hope this isn't weird. I just wanted to check in. Make sure you're okay." I stared at him for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in." He followed me to the kitchen. I made coffee. We sat at the table, the same table where I'd thrown Greg's letters in the trash just days ago. "How bad is it over there?" I asked. Dan let out a long breath. Chaos, he said. Vanessa locked herself in her office. Greg's been on the phone with lawyers nonstop. Half the staff doesn't even know what's going on. They just know there's an eviction notice on the door and the building's being taken away. I stirred my coffee, watching the spoon circle the mug. I didn't want it to be like this, Dan, I said quietly. I just wanted them to see me. He nodded. They see you now. There was a long silence. Then he said, for what it's worth, you deserved better. I looked up at him. His face was sincere. No pity. No judgment. Just honesty. Thank you, I said. He took a sip of his coffee. A lot of people are rooting for you. The ones who've been there long enough to remember what you did for that place. Harold called me yesterday. He saw the news. He said he wished he'd had the guts to do what you're doing. I smiled a little. How's he doing? Better. He got a job at a smaller firm. Pays less, but he's happier. I nodded. We sat there for a while, not saying much. Just two people who'd survived the same machine. When Dan left, he paused at the door. If you need anything, he said, let me know. I thanked him and closed the door. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a calendar in front of me. September 15th. 28 days away. In 28 days, Titan Dynamics would be gone. Anne Bloom Pulse, a wellness startup run by a woman named Iris Tran, would move in. Iris had called me the day before, breathless with excitement. Thank you for this opportunity, Elena. We'll take great care of the space. I told her it had good bones. Because it did. I built those bones. But now, sitting here alone, I couldn't help but wonder. Did I just destroy 19 years of work out of spite? Or did I finally stand up for myself? I didn't know. But I did know one thing. I wasn't backing down. I stood up, walked to the trash can, and looked down at the shoebox I'd thrown away days ago. Greg's letters. His promises. His lies. I tied up the trash bag and carried it outside to the curb. When I came back inside, the house felt lighter. I poured myself another glass of wine, sat on the back porch, and watched the stars come out. The air was cool. The night was quiet. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was going to be okay. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 1 week before the eviction deadline. I was sitting on the back porch with my coffee when I heard the mail truck pull up. I walked to the mailbox, pulled out a stack of bills and catalogs, and saw it at the bottom. Thick. Visual. Return address. Brennan and Associates. Greg's legal team. I carried it back to the porch and set it on the table, staring at it like it might explode. I didn't open it right away. I just sat there sipping my coffee, watching the envelope like it was a live grenade. Finally, I tore it open. Inside was a single-page letter on law firm letterhead. Request for settlement meeting. They wanted to negotiate. I read it twice. Then I called Marcus. They sent me a letter, I said. They want to meet. He was quiet for a moment. Then he sighed. Elena, they have no leverage. They're grasping at straws. Ignore it. I can't. Why not? I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure I could explain it. Because part of me, the part that had spent 19 years caring about that company, about those people, wanted to hear what they had to say. I just need to hear it, I said finally. Marcus sighed again. Fine. But we do it on our terms. Neutral location. My office. And I'm in the room with you. Okay. And Elena? Yeah. Don't let him guilt you into anything. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at 2 p.m. I spent the morning pacing my living room, second-guessing myself. What if this was a mistake? What if Greg twisted my words? What if he recorded the conversation and used it against me? But I'd already agreed. And I wasn't backing out now. Marcus's office was on the 3rd floor of a gray building downtown. Clean. Professional. The kind of place that smelled like leather and old books. I arrived 10 minutes early. Marcus was waiting for me in the lobby. You ready? He asked. No. He smiled. Good. That means you're thinking clearly. We walked to the conference room. It was small. A long table. 6 chairs. A window overlooking the street. And Greg. He was already there. Sitting at the far end of the table. Alone. No Vanessa. No lawyer. No entourage. Just him. He looked terrible. Unshaven. Bags under his eyes. Suit wrinkled like he'd slept in it. His tie was loose, his collar unbuttoned. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. I sat down across from him. Marcus sat next to me, folder in hand, pen ready. Greg didn't look at me right away. He just stared at his hands folded on the table in front of him. The silence stretched. 1 minute. 2. Finally he looked up. "I'm sorry, Elena." I blinked. I wasn't expecting that. He took a breath and then he started talking. And he didn't stop for 20 minutes. He told me about the pressure from investors. The board meetings where they pushed for young leadership and modern operations. He told me Vanessa had convinced him that restructuring was necessary. That my salary was too high for someone in operations. That they needed to trim the fat to stay competitive. He actually used those words. Trim the fat. My jaw tightened. "I fought for you at first," he said, his voice strained. "I told them you were essential. That you'd been here from the beginning. But then they showed me the numbers. And the numbers didn't add up. And he paused, rubbing his face. "I thought you'd understand. I thought you'd be okay. You've always been okay." I leaned forward. "I was okay because I made myself okay, Greg," I said slowly. "Because I had no choice. Because no one else was going to take care of me. But you had a choice. And you chose wrong." He looked down at his hands again. "I know," he said quietly. Another long silence. Then he straightened up, pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. "I want to make this right," he said. I opened the folder. Inside was a formal offer letter. Purchase agreement. 1140 Larimer Street. Offer price. $3.20 million. I stared at the number. $3.2 million. More money than I'd ever had. More than David's life insurance. More than my retirement savings. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. "We'll buy the building from you," Greg said. "Market rate. Full price. Plus a public statement crediting you for Titan's success. An apology. And if you want it, a permanent consultant role. You can work remotely. Set your own hours. Name your price." I looked up at him. He was leaning forward now, his eyes desperate. "Elena, please. This is everything I can offer." Marcus, sitting next to me, raised an eyebrow. He didn't say anything, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. It was a serious offer. I looked at Greg. Really looked at him. His eyes were red. His hands were shaking slightly. He looked like a man who'd lost everything and was trying to claw his way back. And for a moment, just a moment, I felt sorry for him. But then I remembered. Vanessa's smile. The misspelled name. The 19 years of being invisible. The way they looked at me like I was nothing. I closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. "No." Greg's face went pale. "Elena." "No," I said again, my voice steady. "We have 230 employees," he said, his voice rising. "Families. Kids in college. Mortgages. If we lose this building, we lose everything. Clients will pull out. Investors will walk. The company will collapse." I stood up. "Then you should have thought about that before you fired me. Elena, please." I turned toward the door, then stopped. I looked back at him. "You want to know the worst part, Greg?" I said quietly. "I would have helped you. If you just asked. If you treated me like a person instead of a line item on a budget. But you didn't. So now you get to learn what it feels like to be expendable." I walked out. Marcus followed me into the hallway. "You sure about this?" he asked. I nodded. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. We stood in the hallway for a moment. The door to the conference room closed behind us. I could hear Greg inside talking on his phone. His voice was muffled, but I could hear the desperation. Marcus looked at me. "That was a lot of money, Elena." "I know. You could have lived comfortably for the rest of your life." "I know." He studied my face. Then he nodded. "Good," he said. "Because you're worth more than $3 million. You always were." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. We walked to the elevator. Rode down in silence. When we stepped out onto the street, the sun was bright. The air was cool. "What now?" Marcus asked. I looked up at the sky. "Now," I said. "We finish this." He smiled. "Damn right we do." I got in my truck, started the engine and drove home. And for the first time since this all started, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. September 15th arrived like any other day. The sky was overcast. The air smelled like rain. I woke up at 6 a.m., made coffee, and stood at the kitchen window staring out at nothing. Today was the day. I got dressed, jeans, a plain sweater, my old sneakers, and grabbed my keys. I didn't have to go downtown. I didn't have to watch. But I needed to see it. Needed to witness the ending I'd set in motion. I drove through quiet streets, past closed storefronts and empty bus stops. The city was still waking up. By the time I reached downtown, the sun was starting to break through the clouds, casting long shadows across the pavement. I parked across the street from 1140 Larimer Street. And I waited. At 7:30 a.m., the first moving truck pulled up. Then another. Then a third. I watched from my truck as the back doors rolled open and employees started streaming out of the building, carrying boxes, desks, monitors, chairs. Some of them looked angry, shouting at each other, pointing fingers. Some looked confused, like they still didn't understand what was happening. A few looked almost relieved, like they'd been waiting for an excuse to leave. I recognized some of the faces. The junior developers who'd called people like me dead weight. The marketing team who'd never once said thank you. The sales guys who parked in the loading zone and left their trash in the break room. And then I saw Vanessa. She was standing on the sidewalk, phone pressed to her ear, sunglasses covering half her face even though it was overcast. She was barking orders at someone. Probably a moving company, probably her lawyer. Her blazer was perfectly pressed. Her nails were still glossy. She looked like she was directing a corporate evacuation with all the authority of someone who'd never once had to carry her own boxes. And then I saw Greg. He was standing near the entrance, leaning against the brick wall, arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold around him. He looked smaller than I remembered. His suit was wrinkled. His tie was gone. His face was pale, unshaven, hollow. He looked broken. I stared at him through the windshield, my hands gripping the steering wheel. And I didn't feel victorious. I felt sad. Not for him. Not exactly. But for what could have been. For the version of Titan that valued people like me. The version that kept its promises. The version that remembered where it came from. That version never really existed. Maybe it never could have. At 9 a.m., a new set of vehicles pulled up. Smaller. Sleeker. Electric. The doors opened and out stepped a group of young people dressed in athleisure and carrying yoga mats, potted plants, and boxes labeled Bloom Pulse in neat handwriting. Iris Tran stepped out of the lead car, wearing leggings and a green hoodie, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked around, eyes bright, smiling like she'd just walked into a dream. She saw me sitting in my truck and waved. I waved back. She walked over, crossing the street with a bounce in her step. I rolled down the window. "Elena," she said, breathless. "This is so exciting. We're already planning the layout. Meditation corner in the lobby, Himalayan salt lamps in the break room, soft green paint on the walls. It's going to be beautiful." I nodded. "I'm sure it will be." She paused, her smile softening. "I read about what happened with the previous tenants. I'm sorry you had to go through that." I shrugged. "I'm not sorry. Not anymore." He studied my face for a moment, then smiled again. "Good. You deserve better." I watched her walk back across the street, rejoining her team as they started unloading boxes and laughing, talking about paint colors and furniture placement. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. At 11 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Dan. "It's done. Building's clear. Greg left 20 minutes ago. Didn't say a word to anyone." I stared at the message. It's over. Titan Dynamics was gone. I should have felt relieved. Victorious. Free. Instead, I just felt hollow. I started the engine and drove away. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove to a small park on the edge of downtown. It was quiet. Empty. Just a few benches overlooking the city skyline. I sat down and stared at the buildings in the distance, the glass towers reflecting the gray sky. My phone rang. I looked at the screen. Diane. My sister. I almost didn't answer. But then I did. "Elena," she said. "I just saw the news. Are you okay?" I let out a long breath. "I don't know. Tell me what happened." So I did. I told her about the firing, the eviction, the settlement offer Greg had made, the $3 million I turned down. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I'm proud of you." I blinked. Felt tears sting the corners of my eyes. Yeah. You stood up for yourself. That takes guts. I wiped at my eyes. It doesn't feel like guts. It feels like I just burned down everything I built. No, she said firmly. You didn't build that company, Elena. You built the foundation. There's a difference. And they forgot that. So you reminded them. We talked for an hour. About David. About the early days of Titan. About the years I'd spent being invisible. About the future. It was the longest conversation we'd had in years. When I hung up, I felt lighter. Not happy. Not victorious. Just lighter. That evening, I drove back to 1140 Larimer Street one last time. The building was quiet now. The moving trucks were gone. The lights inside were dim. Bloom Pulse had locked up for the night. I parked in the same spot I'd been in that morning and got out of the truck. The air was cool. The street was empty. I walked across the pavement, past the entrance, past the loading dock, and stopped at the parking spot near the back. The spot where Greg used to park his Tesla. Reserved. Untouchable. Now it was just an empty space. I stood there for a moment, staring at the faded lines on the asphalt. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the original building key. Brass. Worn. Heavy with memory. The one I'd had since 2004. The one David and I used to unlock the door for the first time, back when this place was nothing but exposed brick, cracked floors, and a leaking ceiling. I didn't need it anymore. Iris had changed the locks. But I couldn't let it go. I ran my thumb over the worn edges, remembering the day David and I walked through these doors for the first time. The way he'd looked at me and said, "This is it, Elena. This is where it all starts." He'd believed in this place. So had I. I slipped the key back into my pocket. I wasn't letting go of the past. I was just choosing not to be defined by it anymore. I walked back to my truck, got in, and started the engine. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The building stood tall and solid, just like it always had. But it wasn't mine anymore. Not emotionally. Never really was. I turned the corner and drove home. And I didn't look back. 3 months passed like water through a sieve. Slow at first, then all at once. I fell into a routine. Morning coffee on the back porch. Afternoon walks through the neighborhood. Evenings spent reading or watching old movies. The kind of quiet life I hadn't allowed myself in decades. I stopped checking the news. Stopped looking at my phone every 5 minutes. Stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon in early December, I got an email from Marcus. Subject line, "Thought you'd want to see this." I opened it. Attached was a link to a news article. Titan Dynamics files for bankruptcy following eviction and loss of major clients. I clicked the link and read slowly. The company couldn't recover. After losing the building, 2 major clients pulled their contracts. Investors walked. Employees scattered to competitors. Greg Callahan stepped down as CEO. Vanessa Sinclair left to take a job at some tech firm in California. The company that once seemed unstoppable was gone. I closed the laptop and sat back on the couch. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I just felt resolved. They made their choices. I made mine. And now we were all living with the consequences. My phone rang. Iris Tran. "Elena," she said, her voice bright and energetic. "I wanted to thank you again. Business is booming. We just signed 3 new corporate wellness contracts, and we're expanding into Suite 328 next month." I smiled. "That's great, Iris. I'm happy for you. We couldn't have done it without you. Seriously, this space has been incredible. The energy here is just, it's perfect. I'm glad it's working out." "How are you doing?" she asked, her tone softening. "I know the past few months have been a lot." I looked out the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky pink and orange. "I'm doing okay," I said. "Better than okay, actually." "Good. You deserve it." We talked for a few more minutes, then hung up. I set the phone down and sat in the quiet. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. A week later, I started volunteering at a local community center. It was a small place on the east side of Littleton, run by a woman named Patricia who'd been there for 30 years. They offered classes for seniors. Computer skills, cooking, basic home repairs. I signed up to teach the home repair class. It was small work. Fixing leaky faucets. Replacing light fixtures. Unclogging drains. Patching drywall. But it felt meaningful. The students were mostly women in their 60s and 70s. Widows like me who'd spent their lives relying on husbands or handymen and now wanted to learn how to take care of things themselves. One of them, a woman named Margaret, asked me during our third class, "How do you know so much about all this?" I set down my wrench and wiped my hands on a towel. "I worked in facilities management for 19 years, I said. "I took care of a building downtown." "Just one building?" "Just one. But it was a big one." She smiled. "You must have loved it." I paused. "I did. For a long time." "What happened?" I told her. About Titan. About the 19 years. About the firing. About the eviction. She listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, she said, "You did the right thing." I shrugged. "I did what I had to do." She shook her head. "No. You did what most people are too afraid to do. You chose yourself." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent my whole life choosing other people. Choosing the company. Choosing to be invisible. Choosing to stay quiet. For once I chose me. And maybe that was enough. On a cold December morning, I walked out to the mailbox and found a handwritten letter. No return address. Just my name and address in neat, looping handwriting. I carried it back inside, set it on the kitchen table, and stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded carefully. I unfolded it and started reading. "Elena, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I want you to know that I've thought about what you said every day since the eviction. You were right. I took you for granted. I treated you like you didn't matter. And I'm sorry. I've started working with a small startup now. Nothing fancy. Just a handful of people trying to build something real. I'm trying to do things differently. Trying to value people. Trying to remember where I came from. I'll never forget what you taught me, the hard way. I hope you're doing well. You deserve every good thing. Greg." I read it twice. Then I folded it, walked to the bedroom, and put it in the drawer of my nightstand. I didn't need his apology. But I was glad he finally understood. On New Year's Eve, I stood on my back porch with a glass of champagne, watching fireworks bloom over the Denver skyline. The air was cold and sharp. The sky was clear. The fireworks exploded in bursts of red, blue, gold, lighting up the night like falling stars. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A text from Dan. "Happy New Year, Elena. Thanks for everything." I smiled and typed back. "Happy New Year, Dan. Take care." I slipped the phone back into my pocket and took a sip of champagne. I thought about the past year. The betrayal. The eviction. The hollow victory. The unexpected peace. Thought about David. About how he used to tell me I was stronger than I believed. That I could do anything I set my mind to. Maybe he was right. I raised my glass to the sky. Not to what was. Not to what could have been. But to what is. To the woman who owned the building. The woman who finally chose herself. The woman who walked away and never looked back. I took another sip. The champagne was cold and sweet. And for the first time in a long time I felt free. The fireworks continued to explode overhead, painting the sky in brilliant colors, fading and blooming again and again. I stood there, alone but not lonely, watching the night unfold. And I realized something. I didn't need anyone to see me. I didn't need anyone to validate me. I didn't need anyone to remember my name. I knew who I was. I knew what I was worth. And that was enough. I finished my champagne, walked back inside, and closed the door behind me. The house was warm. Quiet. Safe. I walked to the living room and sat on the couch, pulling a blanket over my lap. On the mantel, the photo of David and me still sat in its frame, the two of us smiling in front of the warehouse all those years ago. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I smiled. "I did it, David," I whispered. "I finally did it." And somewhere in the quiet of the night I could almost hear him whisper back. "I always knew you would." I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the warmth of the house wrap around me like a blanket. Outside, the fireworks continued. Inside, I was finally home. If this story of cold, calculated justice had you glued to your screen, smash that like button right now. My favorite part was when Elena slid that property deed across the table and watched their faces drain of color. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more powerful stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.